The International Chess Federation has maintained that only women may compete in the women's chess events. According to the BBC, the ICF reported that as the transgender legislation is rapidly developing in many countries and many sports bodies are adopting their own policies, FIDE will be monitoring these developments and see how we can apply them to the world of chess. 2 years is a scope of sight that seemed reasonable for the thorough analysis of such developments. This is a very moderate and reasonable response to what has been a sustained and continued assault on the sanctity of women's sports. Many are reporting on this as if a class of women have been excluded from women's sports category, when, truthfully, men are not allowed to play. However, regardless of how they identify, there is an open category where anyone can play that is still an option. As the BBC reports, Yosha Iglias, a trans woman professional chess player with the FIDE rank of chess master, said that the policy would lead to unnecessary harm for trans players and women. This appalling situation will lead to depression and suicide attempts, Iglias said. Women grandmaster and two-time U.S. women's champion Jennifer Shashade also criticized the FIDE decision, saying that the policy was ridiculous and dangerous. It's obvious they didn't consult with any transgender players in constructing it. I strongly urge FIDE to reverse course on this and start from scratch with better consultants, Ms. Shahade said. Others have compared the decision to Jim Crow laws or segregation, a common defense that remains offensive and incorrect, as racial violence has always differed in ways due to the sex of the victim. The stance that it is unfair for men to be excluded from women's chess ignores the reason why women's chess category is needed, and no, it's not because men are more intelligent than women, or because women need to be coddled to succeed.
People actually complaining about losing to trans women. It's like they're in like 8th place.
About Leah Thomas, who the first time he competed smashed a record and beat women by a full 40 seconds, and then went on to sexually harass and intimidate women by flashing his dick in the change room. What about Laurel Hubbard, the white son of a millionaire who beat out an Indigenous woman who got into weightlifting as a way to recover from her sexual assault and rape? Feminists struggled and fought for the right for women to participate in sport fairly. This is publicly available information. If you want to go back to the time when women were sexually harassed and intimidated for participating in sport, you can just say that.
Men greatly outnumber women in chess, to the extent that there are 16 male chess players for every woman. The demographic difference does play a large role in how well women perform. Despite a reluctance to admit it exists, gender bias inhibits women's performances in many circumstances, and especially so in chess. For example, when women were unaware of the sex of their opponent, the control condition, females played approximately as well as males. When the gender stereotype was activated, the experimental condition, women showed a drastic performance drop, but only when they were aware that they were playing against a male opponent. When they falsely believed to be playing against a woman, they performed as well as their male opponents. In other words, when women believed that they were playing against men, they played less aggressively than when they believed their opponent was a fellow woman. There is also a sense of intimidation in being the only woman in a room that can prevent girls from playing.
No matter how big or small your dick is, you can't feel it either way.
Or you could just find one that doesn't talk, and when you ask them for consent, it's yes anytime.
Or a blind one.
Yes.
So you don't know where they're at.
Is it saying silence is consent? If they're knocked out, consent?
Say nothing if you give consent.
Just so you know, every single one of us in this room is going to hell.
I'm going.
We're already there, sweetheart. Don't worry.
Even just laughing at this shit, we're going to hell.
This intimidation is often emotional and mental, as a feeling of intruding into a boys' club can make girls, who already tend to have lower self-esteem, even more self-conscious. One teacher in North Carolina started to offer girls-only courses and found that boys dominated the shop courses until she started an all-girls intro to auto class this past school year. When only co-ed trade classes were offered at the school, Carlavati would see 1 or 2 girls at most, but intro to auto filled up quickly, drawing 16 girls. However, there's also been a real danger in doing so as well, going back as far as World War II, where women who served as pilots during the war say that some of their colleagues could end up grounded because they'd have trouble starting their engines, only to discover sugar or other material had been put in them. The same behavior continues today in fields like firefighting, where women often have their equipment sabotaged, are subject to sexual harassment and bullying. For example, in emergency services, female firefighters often face discriminatory practices. One interview details how a female firefighter was hired but given a 90-day probationary period. For men, it was 30. Then the gear theft and tampering started. Her gloves, hoods, and radio vanished. Her mask was sabotaged 2 weeks after 9/11. She found what appeared to be semen on her bed. Clothes continued to be stolen and destroyed. Word of the harassment rose all the way to Mayor Don McLaury, and the department issued a warning against equipment tampering, but nothing substantively changed.
If any of you shared memes making fun of this woman, you should be fucking ashamed of yourself. A lawsuit just came out detailing the amount of abuse that this woman went through, and fuck every single cop that was involved in this. Not only did they coordinate their sexual abuse of this woman, once she started cutting herself and attempting suicide, they were worried about getting caught and started coordinating a fucking plan to make her look like the initiator of all the sexual contact. And then it went viral and all that shit started happening. The cops were doing this on secret phones. Obviously, they're not fucking smart, and people found out about this. They were sharing unwanted photos of her. Dude, it is absolutely disgusting what they were doing to her, and the way that people reacted to the story says so much about how we fucking treat and view women in society. It's disgusting, and I hope she gets a bunch of fucking money and a bunch of fucking help in therapy, because what she went through was fucking horrible. The way society treated her was horrible, and there's a lawsuit if you want to go read it and see the terrible shit that she was put through.
While many strides have been made in the field of chess to encourage and support female players, this same culture of intimidation and misogyny still exists today. As recently as 2015, Nigel Short, vice president of the World Chess Federation, claimed men are hardwired to be better chess players than men, adding, "You have to gracefully accept that." Many female chess players also note a trend of grooming and sexual abuse, as well as sexual harassment, which seems to be common in every sport. So when supporters of male inclusion in female sports categories complain about the indignity and harm that maintaining female-only categories cause, remember why those categories exist. Their strawman arguments, namely that we must find women to be inferior in some way to want room of our own, stem from either an ignorance of the hardships that women are still overcoming to be included in historically male fields, or a lack of empathy for those struggles. I do find it interesting how few seem to care when the inclusion was men keeping women from higher paying jobs, entrance to clubs and social groups, from higher education and scientific fields. But when women have fought for the right to access to these spaces and created places where one can exist free from the oversight of her oppressor, who does change her behavior, thoughts, and actions in perceptible ways just by being present, never mind those who actively seek to harm her, then it is a problem. And of course, this problem too stems from a social acceptance of an unclear idea being ratified into law. Trans women are women, they say. But what does it mean to be trans? And what does that mean when to be trans is a choice and to be female is not? It is no hate crime to admit that humans are sexually dimorphic and that women and men have differences, both biologically and socially imposed. It is no hate crime to acknowledge that equality and equity are different things and that these differences must be addressed for any fairness to exist, rather than ignoring them for the sake of social niceties. You can't address sexual discrimination, harassment, or abuse without first acknowledging why they occur and to whom, and the adoption of gender identity as synonymous with sex is both unscientific and anti-feminist, and in many ways racist, as their arguments often place women of color as being the same as men. Quite simply, the International Federation of Chess did a good thing here, although already national organizations have announced their decisions to ignore these guidelines. We can only hope that common sense wins out, or that those who work on these panels gain the ability to do basic research to see why women perform better in single-sex spaces. Until then, we'll take the victory for what it is, an acknowledgement that women do have a need for dignity and a right to a room of their own. This, dear viewers, is where we part. I'm not someone who's really interested in chess. I tried learning how to play, and unfortunately, it's kind of hard to teach yourself. I'm definitely still working on it, and I think it's definitely a valuable skill. But I've noticed a definite trend in certain areas, for example, in esports, where there's a lack of women, and that's taken to be seen as a lack of skill rather than an act of abuse, of harassment, and actual result of those policies. The reason why you don't see very many competitive or high-level video game players that are women is because the minute you open your mouth, you are treated differently. And there are many studies to point this out. And for people to continually ignore the fact that we have been socially raised differently, we are impacted by our societies around us and by socialization in favor of, well, my feelings say this, it's very disheartening to see. And although I don't always agree with the reasoning for why policies like these come to be, I'm really happy to see that at least one organization is standing up for the right for women to have their own sports categories, which we honestly shouldn't be having to fight for to begin with. If you guys have any comments, questions, or concerns, let me know in the comment section down below, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!